Hello and welcome to Scotty Kilmer Live Car Talk Podcast, where I use my 51 years of fixing cars to answer your car questions. People need the truth. I'm here to help you out. You see, there's no ads flying all over the place here. That's because I'm telling the truth and nobody's sponsoring it but the truth. Remember, during the show, ask your questions on the live chat. I'll pick the best ones, then answer them. The first question is APAG. Hey, Scotty, I live in Canada. Would like to know what you would recommend, a secondhand RAV4 or a secondhand Subaru Impreza? Well, I went to university in Toronto a long time ago when dinosaurs roamed the plains there. You Canadians taught me how to play hockey. Got pretty good at it, too. Fooling some of your guys. Now, you've got an interesting choice there. The RAV4s last a long time. They're really well made. But all the Subarus are all-wheel drive. It depends on where you live in Canada. Now, when I was living in Toronto, it didn't snow all that much. They plowed the roads and just regular two-wheel drive worked perfectly fine. But if you live up north like Aurelia or out west, up north where it snows a lot more, the all four-wheel drive is, pretty good system. Now, if you got a RAV4 with a four-wheel drive, yeah, but most of the Subarus are all-wheel drive, where only a few of the Toyotas are all-wheel drive. So you got to decide whether you want all-wheel drive or not. If you don't want all-wheel drive, get the RAV4. But if you do, you're probably better off with the Subaru there. Next question. Firewall Administrator 612 says, Scotty, would it be dumb for me to dump $20,000 on the 96 Impala SS with 20,000 miles? Well, I wouldn't spend that kind of money. But, if you're talking about an SS, it's a fancier one. I'm assuming it's got the V8 Corvette engine in it, and they're kind of fun to drive around. What you have to do with a vehicle like that, though, is you got to make sure that's the real mileage, because that's what? A 23-year-old vehicle. You got to get proof registration when it was inspected. Make sure the mileage always was the same. It went up a little at a time, and that it just doesn't have a different speedometer put in it, because if you're going to pay that kind of money, you got to make sure that that's the real mileage of a vehicle. Now, back then, GM was building a lot better vehicles than they make today, so it could be a really good vehicle, but you would want to prove that it actually had only 20,000 miles on it. Axis of Evil says, my Chrysler 300C will hang up in second gear once in a while. I'll have to slow it down so it drops a gear. Then it seems okay. Any idea what could be causing the issue? Okay, those are notorious for having horrible automatic transmissions, and you're getting a problem inside it. That's just... Any automatic transmission that acts like that has internal problems that are starting to wear. Like years ago, Mercedes-Benz put a bunch of automatic transmissions in their 300 diesels, and the 300 diesels were pretty good engines, but the transmissions were a little bit weak. And most of my customers, as they got really old, that's what they do. They'd step on the gas and they'd take off, but if they wanted to shift gear, they'd take their foot off the gas a little, then it would shift into the next gear. It's always a sign that the inside of the automatic transmission is starting to have serious problems. Now, if you baby and it goes okay, those things aren't worth that much money as they age. You didn't say what year it was, but you might just want to baby it, because if you're going to have a rebuilt transmission put in one of those things, it's going to cost thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. So you might think twice. You might even think about getting rid of it and getting another vehicle that doesn't have a problem like that if you're thinking about keeping it long term. Abdullah Kashabi says, hey, Scotty, is there a way to predict if the battery will not be able to start my engine? Oh, of course there is. I got a good battery checking machine. The best one that I use is called a Midtronics. It's a very good electronics company. And all I have to do is put that Midtronic battery tester on a battery. It takes 30 seconds. And it says, you want to check the battery? Yes. Then you look on the battery for the ratings. And if it's like 750 cold cranking amps, then I set it for 750 cold cranking amps. I push the button. It tests the battery. It's a very accurate system. I advise people, if they're worried and they got an older battery, find a guy like me or places like AutoZone, do it for free, and have the battery load tested. Just make sure you have it load tested by an honest mechanic, because if they're crooked, let's say you had a 600 cold cranking amp battery. To make it look bad, all I would have to do is hook that tester up, and instead of saying it's 600 amps, put it to like 800 amp testing, and it would say it's bad because it's an older battery and it's a lower rated battery. So you got to make sure that it's an honest person checking it with the machine in the first place, because a lot of guys want to sell you stuff. So watch him check it. Next question. Curtis Wengrud said, "Hey, Scotty, what is the strangest homemade repair you had to correct? Thanks." Okay. Well, I have to say, the strangest was somebody did a brake job on their car and they put them on backwards. And of course, when they put them on, they stopped because they're the same shape, but instead of having the brake pad material squeezing the rotors, it was the metal backing squeezing it. And of course, I had to replace the rotors too, because the metal on metal ate it all up. I do have to say that was probably the strangest thing. Now, it can be done, you know. You can put them on backwards because they're the same shape. It's just that one side has brake pads and the other has solid metal. So you never want to do something like that on a vehicle you're working yourself. Next question. Stefano RR says, I got a vehicle, it's Pontiac Vibe, and it's running on a biofuel, LPG and gasoline. The LPG has no issue, but with the gasoline, it is a rough idle when it's warmed up and gives loss of power at 3,500 RPMs and up. It gains back and then it loses. Okay. Well, you know there's nothing wrong with the engine or the ignition system because it works fine on LPG. So you got some kind of a problem with your gasoline running system. The first thing I would advise doing would be to pressure test the fuel pump, because the fuel pump for the gasoline is a different system than the LPG that's a pressurized system by itself. Gasoline has to be pumped pressure with the pump. Pray it's just a weak fuel pump. It could be that simple. If it isn't, it could get really complicated. It could be the fuel injectors are dirty or the computer isn't pulsing them right. But it has to be something in that gasoline fuel system, because if it runs perfect on the LPG, everything else is running fine. So pressure test the fuel pump first. That's the first thing that I would do. Next question. Sergeant Velociraptor says, Scotty, what do you think will last longer with the least amount of problems? An '08 Nissan Maxima automatic with 65,000 miles, or a 2006 Acura TXS manual with 135,000 miles? Well, I would go with the Acura on that, because those Nissan Maximas had problems with their automatic transmissions and electronic problems in 2008. That was after Renault merged with Nissan. So I would go with the TXS manual, because it's a fancy Honda, and Honda makes excellent manual transmissions and excellent engines. The weak thing of an Acura TXX is their automatic transmissions, but that's got a manual, so I would go for that, even though it has almost twice the mileage that the Nissan has, because when a Nissan automatic transmission goes out, it's more money than the car's worth to fix. And the Acura with the manual would be more fun to drive, anyone. Next question. The Andy Tran episode says, Scotty, is there any cheap car mods for an interior to make it a little more unique? Sure, like I've shown before, you can get those cool lighting kits, LED lighting kits with remotes that you can stick all inside. That makes it look unique, the different colors and everything that goes on. Or you can go and get colored LED bulbs and just put different bulbs in where you want. And if you're into some of the fancier car seats, There's some real fancy car seats out there that they're not cheap. You know, it might be 150, 200 bucks a piece, but they really change the look and the color of the interior. And there are some very fancy mat systems. I put one in my wife's Lexus that it's got a nice leather underlayment, and then the mats snap on inside there, and it really snazzes up a worn down rug system because it covers everything up. There's some stuff you can do without spending a fortune that you can easily do yourself. Next question. Alexander Durker says, Scotty, my wife's '03 Corolla has multiple misfire codes and it's spitting liquid out of the exhaust. Never seen this before. What could it be? Okay. Well, sadly, that's often a blowing head gasket. If you get liquid coming out of the back and it doesn't run right, it's almost always a blown head gasket. Now, you can easily check it yourself. I've got a video how to tell if your head gasket is blown. Watch that on my YouTube channel. And you can get the tester kit from Amazon for like 30 bucks and test it yourself. And if that's the case, you might think about getting rid of the vehicle because it's going to cost a lot of money to tear that engine apart and put it together. And very few guys these days really know how to rebuild engines. When I was younger, it was a lot easier. They were simple engines. You could take them apart and put them together in 4 or 5 hours, but the new ones are very complex. Do that test first. Next question. Westy Testy says, should I get used or completely new tires? I need all new 4 tires. Okay, well, personally, I advise buying new tires. Now, here's the thing. If you're talking about used tires, why did the person get rid of the tires in the first place? Generally because they're old and cracked and they're worn out. Now, if you live in an area where there's a bunch of rich people and a bunch of crooked mechanics, hey, maybe you can get good used tires. I mean, I had a customer and she did CPA work. And one of her clients was this rich guy who was a millionaire. And he had a Volvo. And he took it into these mechanics that were absolute crooks. This Volvo had 18,000 miles on it, and they already sold him 3 sets of brake pads. There's no way you can wear them out that fast. And 3 sets of tires. Well, now, if you could get the used tires from that guy, I'm sure they were in really good shape. Go right ahead, you know. But normally, people get rid of tires because they got problems, they're cracked, they're worn out, and you don't want to buy used tires. But, I mean, if you could find a crooked mechanic that takes perfectly good tires off people's cars, sells them new ones, and he sells those, go right ahead. Next question. Stone Skin says, Scotty, a Toyota Yaris, is it a good car to buy used for daily uses? Well, it can be. Here's the thing. Realize that Toyota Yaris's are really Mazdas. For some reason, Toyota got rid of making some really cheap cars and bought them from Mazda practically and sold them as Toyota Yaris's. I just worked on one the other day. It was my neighbor's sister's car. And it's got 140,000 miles on it and still runs okay. You know, they're a smaller car and, you know, they don't have that much pickup. And if you don't mind the ride, they're going to be a rougher ride because their wheelbase is so small. The smaller the wheelbase of a car, of course, the worse it's going to ride. That's just the way physics works. So if you don't mind the way they ride, use it for a daily work car. Go ahead, you know, they're really solid built cars. Now, if you can drive a standard transmission and you can find one, they're much better because the automatics, they don't have that much power and they idle a little weak with the strain of an automatic transmission. But even with an automatic, they can last a long time. Next question. Mr. Anacondo says, which car's more reliable out of a Grand Am, the 3400 or the G6 with the 3500? Okay, The 3400 was a more reliable engine. The 3400 really was one of the most reliable engines as GM made. They're pretty good engines, you know. I mean, the rest of the car I'm not in love with. Their automatic transmissions were garbage, and as they age, their electrical systems tend to go haywire, especially if they got that dual climate control where you can control the heat and air conditioning on the left side and the right side separately. That stuff always breaks and the actuators go out, and it can cost hundreds, if not over $1,000 to replace the stupid things. But out of those, the 3400 was actually a pretty good engine. It's just that the rest of the vehicles weren't all that hot, and then, you know, they don't make them. They haven't made Pontiac for years now. GM decided to stop making them to cut costs. Next question. Fresh Fish says, Scotty, I'm thinking about buying a 2002 BMW M3 with 60,000 kilometers. What do you think? Okay, well, the M series were a special series of cars, and they are fun to drive. And what? 60,000 kilometers is like 32,000 miles. That's not much mileage. If you don't have to pay too much, now those are collector's items, so you're going to have to pay a certain amount of money. But if you like that type of car, and you're not going to put heavy mileage on it, say it's going to be your weekend toy, they can be a very fun car. I got a customer with one. He loves the car. He's nuts about it. So, you know, his girlfriend drives something that I think it's a Toyota Highlander, and they use that when they travel around all the place, and they use the M3 for toy. They can be fun, you know. Just don't pay really, really high dollar for it. You're going to have to pay something, though, because they are collector's items. Next question. Eddie Teddy says, hey, Scotty, I got a Nissan Sentra, 2015, 22,000 miles. When should I trade it in since you said they have CVT problems? Well, they shouldn't have it at that mileage. And here's the problem. It's 2015, so it's 4 years old, right? You're not going to get much for it anyways. You trade it in. You're hardly going to get anything at all. I've had customers trade them in when they were 5, 6 years old, and they gave them $1,500 for it. So what the heck? You might as well just keep driving it around with the low mileage you have on. Drive it and see how long it lasts, you know? That's basically what I'd say with that, because you're upside down in that car anywhere. You probably owe more money on it than the car's worth, so you might as well just drive it around, see how long it lasts. It comes to a point in some cars that you are better to just drive them, because you're going to lose so much money anyways. You might as well just drive it and hope that something major doesn't go wrong. And sometimes they don't. Next question. Colin O'Hara says, Scotty, what are your thoughts on an 85 to 89 Chevy Camaro? What are certain things to look for? I'm thinking about buying one for $5,000 Canadian. Okay, well, that's not much for a car in Canada, because I know in Canada cars more. They cost more. Everything costs more in Canada. I don't know how you guys can stand it. I mean, I've seen little bungalows in Toronto that they're at $3 million. But that said, they can be fun cars. Now, if you're going to get one, definitely get a V8. Don't get the 6. The 6, bad. They don't run that great, and they have no resale value anyways. If it's a V8, the older the better. If you can get an 85, hey, they are still pretty well made then. You want to have it checked out, you know, the transmission, to make sure it still runs good and drives around and doesn't smoke out the back, burning a lot of oil. That's the main thing. Because some guys get those things and they beat the heck out of them, and then you're stuck with something that had the heck beat out of it. And since $5,000 is still a reasonable amount of money, find a guy like me, pay him $80 or whatever, and let him check it out for an hour to see what kind of shape the thing is in. Next question. Florence Double X says, Scotty, aren't you afraid of big franchise car companies finding all the negative things you say about them? How they can watch? What am I going to be afraid of, you know? None of them ever sued me. How are they going to sue me? I've been working on cars for 51 years, and I just tell the truth. You know, what are they going to say? Like Dodge. Oh, no, we don't make bad automatic transmissions in our minivans. Ha! I know they do, and all real mechanics know that they do. You know, tell them the truth. People might get mad at you, but what can they do about it, you know? You be honest with people. People appreciate the honesty. And, I mean, Let them complain, but I don't care. You tell the truth. I don't have any worries. I got 51 years experience of backing me up and saying that, oh yeah, back in 69, you made some really good cars, but then you went to this design that was worse, then you changed it there. I probably know more than half of the people that work there about their cars. Next question. One Shakunin says, Scotty, I want to buy a third generation Toyota Supra. Are they really that unreliable of a car? I'd like to know from your experience. Okay. If you get one that's not really high mileage and it's a decent car, it can be a fun car to drive around. But it's not an everyday driver because it's just too old. Now, if it's one you got to check out through the VIN number and ask an expert like me, because let's say it's the one that had the double overhead cam 6-cylinder engine that had problems with the cams. I would not buy one of those unless somebody can prove that they've replaced the cams in them, because that's a really big expense. And even though they're Toyotas, you have to understand that they're so old that sometimes you can't even get the parts. I had a customer with one, and it needed certain electronic parts. I called the Toyota dealer. They said, no, we don't make parts for that car anymore. It's too old, and we don't have those particular parts for the fuel injection system. Who wants to buy a car that you can't buy parts for? Now, if you're going to radically modify it, say turn it into a drift car, maybe put a different engine in it or something, or just tear everything off the top of the head and run carburetors or something, go right ahead if you want to modify it like that. But as a stock car, I don't advise buying one as an everyday driver. Next question. Jesus Garcia says, I got an '07 Mustang. My brakes keep sinking to the floor. Mechanic says the master cylinder is good and there's no leaks. Well, one, I'd say find another mechanic, because it's his job to find the problem. If he said he can't find the problem, he's not a very good mechanic. When they sink to the floor, either you got a bad master cylinder or you have a leak somewhere in the system. Could be anywhere. Could be in an anti-lock brake system. Could be in a cylinder. Could be anywhere. Or you got a bad master cylinder, a bad brake booster. A bad brake booster will do it too. And here's the thing that you can kind of get an idea about the booster is. Turn the engine off. Step on the brake with the engine turned off. If it's rock hard, you start up the engine, and then you step on it and it sinks, you got a bad booster, and then you'd have to replace the booster on it. That's a decent test to see if the booster's bad, because the boosters aren't cheap. They're relatively expensive, and you don't want to have to put one on if you don't have to, because that's an awful lot of money you're going to spend. Next question. John Lowe says, Scotty, do you like FJ Cruisers? Well, I thought they were a cool vehicle. And Toyota stopped making them. But I think the main reason they stopped making them was because, they're up high up in the air. They're not aerodynamic. They had a big 6-cylinder engine, and they were pretty big gas hogs. And I think that basically Toyota is trying to get their stream of cars and trucks to go for better gas mileage, and they just decided to not make them anymore. They're well made. I had customers with them, and they're all happy. And I had some customers who said, hey, I want to buy a new one, but I can't. They're not making them anymore. So I said, well, go look for a good used one. They're not that easy to find, because usually the guys that buy that type of vehicle, if that's the type of vehicle they want, they're going to be happy with the Toyota. It's not like, oh, they bought a car and they didn't really like the way it was made and what it looked like and what it did. But people that buy those things, they were looking for something like that. So there's really nothing wrong other than they decided not to make them anymore. Next question. Manny Ramirez says, my Honda loses power only when it goes uphill. What causes this? Okay, well, that's called losing power under a load. The heaviest load your car is going to have is when you're going uphill, especially if you're doing it at higher speeds. Start with the simple stuff. First, change the fuel filter. Something that's done with the clogged fuel filter can cause that. If it's not that, after you change the filter, pressure test the fuel pump. A weak fuel pump will do the same thing. Now, if you have dirty fuel injectors and the fuel pump's okay, that'll do that, so you get them pressure cleaned. That's a good thing to do. And this is rare, but it can happen. And you want to pray it's not that. If you got a bad automatic transmission, sometimes when the transmissions go out, they have problems going uphill. I had a customer years ago with a Toyota. I heard her say, oh yeah, you tell great Toyotas, well, everything breaks eventually. And it would only act up when it went uphill. And I finally figured out and said, you know, it's your transmission. And I don't overhaul automatic transmissions. I sent it to my tranny guy and he fixed it and the problem went away. But that's relatively rare. The other problems show up more often. So check them first. Next question. CP says, Scotty, your thoughts on an 87 Buick Grand National. Okay, well, those are collector's items now. People like them. And for the type of vehicle that they are, they're pretty good vehicles, you know? I mean, they've got a lot of room and they got dependable engines and their transmissions were pretty dependable. People that want that type of vehicle, that's not a bad vehicle. Now realize if you're going to get one that's a stock vehicle, you're going to pay pretty good money for it because they become collector items. And that's, you know what, it's a 32-year-old vehicle now. So, you know, it's going to be an older vehicle, but since they're a collector's item, you don't want to buy something like that and use it as an everyday driver. You want to take care of it and keep it and insure it. And realize that if you insure a classic car like that and you don't drive it, if you drive it less than like 5,000 miles a year, you can get pretty cheap insurance on those things. My customers are driving when they tell me some of them are only paying $300-400 a year for insurance on them. So, you know, it might not be a bad deal. Next question. Wagas Ahmed says, my headlights are weak. What should I do? I have a BMW 1 Series. Okay, well, the problem with a lot of those BMWs are those things are so expensive and they're all so complex. Even the headlights are computer run that a lot of times they melt because they're plastic inside. Look closely with a flashlight in the daytime and see if anything looks melted inside. If it's melted inside, you're just going to have to replace those super expensive assemblies. And if that's the case, go Chinese, get an aftermarket copy and knockoff because it's going to save you thousands of dollars. But if it's not melted, the first thing you want to check are the ground wires because electric wires and cars have power and ground. You got to have electricity going to the light bulbs, and you have to have ground wires that come out of the bulbs so that the electricity can flow. And pray that it's just a bad ground wire, because if it's weak ground wire, they'll be weak and they won't work. You want to pray it's that, and the whole things aren't melting, but I see them melt all the time because you pay a lot of money for those cars, but man, that plastic stuff is made cheaper. Next question. Jason Bourne says, Scotty, I replaced the alternator in my ILS 250. Now the auto goes up and down when I put a full load on. Could it be the alternator? I changed or something else. It's a CarQuest alternator and belt. Okay. Double check your work area first. That's just something that you have to do, because if you didn't do it before and it does it now, you could have knocked off a vacuum line, got a wire loose or something. You want to really check that. But CarQuest, hey, I have questionable quality with some of their stuff. So first thing I do is take it to a guy like me and load test that alternator. And if they load test it, I can load test an alternator in 2 minutes with my fancy Midtronics tester. And if I load test and say the alternator's no good, then the alternator's good, no good. And I would just take it back to them and say, give me my money back and go get a quality one that's an actual Nippon Denso rebuilt and not some CarQuest one. You want quality with an alternator because, you know, even though it's going to cost you more, it's really important for modern computer-run cars to have a good supply of electricity. Next question. Yala Yolo says, Scotty, what do you think of the Cadillac XDS models? Okay, they're fun to drive. They're zippy to go around, but as they age, they are endless money pits. I had a customer with one, and he was a corporate lawyer, which tells you how much money he made. Houston's a big place for corporate lawyers. They make a lot of money. He got rid of it because he said he couldn't stand it. It was costing him too much money to fix because everything was made that as it aged and broke and started to fall apart. And they aren't that easy to work on either. If you're going to buy one, my advice is don't. Lease it. Get a lease. And then you know how much money you're spending. There's no secrets. And then you get it off lease and you don't own it anymore before it really starts to fall apart. That's my advice with them. I know a lot of customers get stuff like that, and then they got it out of their system. They said, oh, that was great. I didn't have to spend any extra money, and that was the end of it. But don't buy one. Next question. Daniel Yaya says, Scotty, what do you think of a 93 Nissan pickup with 160,000 miles? Okay, 93 was when Nissan was still making solid pickup trucks. I got customers, those things that have, 300,000 miles on them. There's nothing wrong with buying one, but it's a 93. So what are you talking about? 26-year-old vehicle. So, it's an older vehicle and it's not worth that much money. Don't pay a whole bunch of money for it. But those things can run a long, long, long time, especially if it's a four-cylinder engine, because those four-cylinder engine ones, man alive, they could last a long time. And if it's got a standard transmission, even more so, they can run forever and just keep going and going. That was long before Renault took over Nissan back in 93. And those things were solid built. The customers of mine that had them back then, they were all pretty happy with them. Well, that's it for today. Remember, I upload 2 videos a day on the Scotty Kilmer channel on YouTube, so subscribe and don't forget to push the notification bell so you get notified every time I put one up. And if not, I'm here every Saturday at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time on YouTube Live, answering your questions, and Thursdays at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. So I'll catch you on Thursday if I don't see you till then.